This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. On this week's episode, memoirs from two men who blazed a trail by being different from what many expected of them. Congressman Barney Frank was the first member of Congress to voluntarily come out as gay, and the first to marry someone of the same sex while in office. He also developed a reputation as a confrontational speaker and legislator who fought for what he believed in. We discuss his book, Frank, A Life in Politics, From the Great Society to Same-Sex Marriage. And then, we see a lot of writing these days from ultra-Orthodox Jews who are leaving or who have left their communities and occasionally their families. But one man started that genre under the blog name Hasidic Rebel. He's got a new memoir out, and Shulem Deen stopped by to discuss All Who Go Do Not Return. But first, here's my interview with Barney Frank. We hear a lot today, for example, when we recently had the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the idea that for a lot of gay men and lesbian women in the military, that there was almost a sense of just needing to spend so much concentration on being closeted. Did you feel that?
No question. Having to conceal an important part of yourself takes a lot of work, and even more than the time, it takes enormous emotional energy. And interestingly, I tried when I first got to Washington to be, as far as the public was concerned, I was closeted, neutral. I was trying to live as a gay man privately. So more and more straight people figured this out. And in the year or so before I decided I would volunteer that I was gay, a number of good liberal members of Congress, very supportive of LGBT rights, said to me, please don't do that. We heard you're planning to do this. They were afraid that I would be less effective on every other issue except gay rights. And I couldn't deny that to them. I thought that might be the case, but my answer was, but you know, I just can't live like this. I can't live denying myself. So after I did come out, most of those who had urged me not to came up and said, well, glad that you did. Over and above the political impact of helping people accept gay people, you're better at the job because you're nicer.
You were unafraid to be, at the same time, an advocate, a legislative advocate.
Thank you. That was very important to me. I decided in 1972 two things. One, I would have to be a coward. I wanted to get elected. I thought I could do good in a lot of areas if I got elected, because I thought, again, my particular combination of talents and weaknesses, I'd be very good as a legislator, not so good in other places. Secondly, though, what I said, all right, I won't tell the truth about being gay, but I will never be a hypocrite. I determined the first day I just said I was going to run for office that I would be an advocate for LGBT rights. Gay rights was what we called them at the time. And I continue to have contempt for those people who are themselves gay and then vote for legislation or enforce laws that discriminate against other gay people.
One of the interesting threads that runs through your book is how you deal with what a lot of people would call hypocrisy in legislators and elected officials, where there's flip-flopping, there are compromises that a lot of constituencies don't understand, and a lot of people would say, well, you're saying one thing today, you said the other thing yesterday, not on being gay or on gay rights, but on issues of financial regulation, on issues of war, on so many legislative issues. But you've got a very philosophical approach when it comes to this idea of hypocrisy in elected officials.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's hypocrisy if you pretend. Look, any legislator is in an essentially compromised position given the nature of democracy, because your decision about how to vote inevitably is a compromise between your own views and the views of your voters. I mean, my right to make laws that ultimately would compel other people to do what a majority of us said is only valid because the majority of the voters voted for me. My own way to deal with that was this. I will run for office and I will tell you what I think. And I will then go do what I think right. And if you don't like what I'm doing, then you can kick me out. But I did make this compromise. There were several issues that I thought were very important, moral issues. There were some issues which were less important to me. Where the road should go. I would listen to my voters on those things. You do make a good point, but saying one thing and doing the other, I think, it is one thing to say, here's what I hope to get accomplished and settle for less. What's inexcusable is to run for office, committing yourself to a particular thing, and then switching it. Once people have voted for you on a certain basis, then I think you have to stick with it.
In that vein, you were recently critical of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, who very explicitly in his run for office made a call that a lot of people found noxious in the international sphere, but said that he was asked, if you're prime minister, will there be there won't be a Palestinian state? And he said, indeed, in an interview. He kind of retracted it in an interview almost immediately after the election, but people voted for him on that.
On that basis, he did Israel terrible damage in that. In the first place, look, my own view has been that Israel, in its own interest and morally, should be seen to be willing to make peace if there is a reasonable peace to be made. And in fact, historically, I think the record shows it's been more often the Palestinians who have walked away from that. Arafat was never serious about peace. And even after Arafat, Abbas never felt he had the political support in the Arab world to do it. Bill Clinton tried to get them a deal that was a good deal. Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak both tried to. What Netanyahu did was to get the Arab intransigence off the hook. It's now hard to explain to people that it was the fault of the Arabs that we didn't get a two-state solution, because they say you have a prime minister that you're supporting doesn't want to.
And now, the former Hasidic rebel, Shulem Deen. Your story is different from a lot of the other ones we hear, in a few and very distinct ways. You've got the fact that you're a man, where a lot of the other writing that we've seen on this is from women, from whom it's a lot easier to understand where examples of bias and differential treatment lead to a very specific set of reasons for women to want to leave that community. You were married and a father. You were in your mid-30s when you left, and so that has meant a whole lot of different issues for you.
Within this community of people who leave the Haredi world, it is generally perceived to be more male than female. I think because the world is so unaccustomed to hearing the male perspective, I think there was a challenge for me. Like I felt the weight of that a little bit, that I have to present something here that is real, authentic, not overstated. But I also felt like there were aspects of the male experience within the Haredi world that simply get no attention, and they need attention.
You had no idea until the day of your marriage how sex worked at all, and then you still needed some instruction afterward from rabbis, and you didn't have a sense of at all how to get a job, what a job was supposed to be, what skills you might need for a job. Right. You talk about this one episode when a bunch of guys were brought together and told to make a resume, or however they pronounce it.
A resume.
Yeah,
a resume. They were told to fill out their resumes, and they were like, "What's a resume?" It was completely baffling. But my greatest skill was excellent English reading and writing skills. That was like, and I thought I was really good at it, and it turns out I probably was, because I had been a voracious reader as a child, and I just read whatever I could. So I'd sort of, I'd given myself enough of that so that I thought that was actually a skill. But little did I know that, if you're applying for a job in and around the New York metro area, having excellent English reading and writing skills doesn't get you very far.
It would be one thing if you said, well, this is for some people and it's not for others, and by the way, if you end up, losing your faith, if you end up being unhappy, it'll be a tumultuous time for you. But then the fact that you end up being put out in the world as this completely naive, undereducated person with no sense of how to navigate the world, that's a real tragedy.
It starts earlier. The real tragedy is that 90% of the people who are going to be in this situation feel trapped and are not even going to feel able to get out. So they're going to continue to live lives in which they are really, genuinely, deeply miserable, but too dependent on the social and familial structures within the Hasidic community to feel like they can ever make it if they get out, if they leave. And then looking out to that world and seeing what's required, seeing that you need to be somewhat educated and you need to understand not just to have a formal education, but you also need to be conversant in what you might call the language of modernity, right? You might be an okay English speaker, but there are lots of subtleties, there are cultural references, there are just things that there's a lot more that you would need to know in order to be to pass as a member of secular society, and that takes a long time to learn. And so people within sometimes just don't feel like that's possible, and they feel really, really trapped.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPLING Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast and the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.